Welcome to this new episode of Conversations Under Insulations. Today we have our experienced expert from Bureau Veritas, Andrea Di Lillo. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Prafull, and it is really a pleasure to be with you in this conversation under insulation, discussing this interesting topic. And thank you very much for inviting. I am with you, and let's dedicate this time to our audience now.
So let's see, we will jump into the question. This is about CUI, corrosion under insulation. So, Andrea, you have been working with a lot of global clients from Bureau Veritas, doing RBI studies, doing inspections. Is CUI still a big issue?
Prafull, as we know, corrosion under insulation is still a significant concern in different industries, and particularly it is in sectors where there are insulated equipment, there are pipelines, vessels that are normally used to transport or store product at different temperature. And the CUI is one of the most important corrosion issues that can be commonly encountered on site. And for the people like us that we are spending a daily, let's say, life, I would say, on walking into the customer sites, it is something that we recognize could lead to severe safety, environmental, and also operational risk.
So you're saying it's still an issue. In my experience too, we see in Europe in particularly that people report statistically 40 to 60% of leaks even happening due to CUI. That's significant. So that's my experience too when we talk to people in Europe, but globally, what is your understanding globally beyond Europe?
Yeah, I would say that corrosion under insulation, it's globally impacting in terms of cost. So there are figures related nearly to trillions of US dollar. And let's say there are publications that suggest that the corrosion under insulation, as you mentioned, can account for more than 40% of the plant piping maintenance expenditures. And that's why, let's say, many organizations and inspection companies like Bureau Veritas have recognized the importance of addressing the corrosion under insulation to, first of all, prevent accident, but also, of course, to maintain the integrity of the asset and comply with the regulation.
Mm-hmm. And is there a geographical observation? Say it is more in some geographies than the others?
The experience that we have with corrosion under insulation can vary depending on the industry, on the location, of course, also on the process involved. No, so there are clients that have a higher risk of corrosion insulation under insulation related problems. Others that have already implemented very robust prevention and inspection program that have already mitigate the risk. But to your question on the geography, we have. If I can, let's say, divide the world in two major zones, we can say that we have not seen major or many concern on facilities that are located on shore, in the desert or arid areas, like come to me, for example, the Middle East, without mentioning a specific country, but where there are onshore facility with very low rainfall and maybe those are far from coast. Having said that, of course, we have to also say that exposure to the localized wetness, such as the main frequent example is cooling tower overspray or deluge system, when there is untreated seawater, is known as a big risk. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, the second area is that corrosion under insulation is becoming a major concern in facilities that are located offshore or in coastal areas. Now, without point out specific zone, but we were saying before Europe. So, for example, in the North Sea, there are, it could be an example. And in area, so similar to that, there are cases with several failures and also leak histories that are let's say, especially when there is some significant backlog for the inspection of the insulated component related particularly for the aging facilities.
Yeah, well, and I share observations in offshore and onshore, but I have a specific observation from the desert. Now, there's no rain in the desert, so there's no CUI from the rain side, but we are observing and hearing about CUI being concerns where deluge systems are there. For spray, they spray salt water and it goes water in. That's like CUI creation without out of nowhere. Secondly, there are these cryogenic systems like propane refrigeration units, which are naturally having ice formations under the insulation, and they are the source of water. So even in desert, we hear about a bit of CUI conditions. However, the severity may be low because of less chlorides.
Yeah.
So yeah, very specific examples in that. So um, talking about specifics. CUI, obviously, it's a broad issue, but obviously there are specific problems associated or solutions associated with that. So naturally, inspections, insulations, coatings, and even RBI. So tell us more about why CUI still remains an issue when these systems independently have been worked upon.
Yes, Prafull, very interesting observation, and we enter now in a space that deserves some more attention because so what we know is that corrosion under insulation occurs on let's say so neglected location which are hidden under the insulation, and the main issue is that operators, even with very good inspection and maintenance plan, still suffer from those unexpected leaks due to the corrosion under insulation. And maybe what we can also say is that remaining a challenge in the space that you mentioned, like the element of insulation degradation. There are conditions associated to moisture ingress, and it is also depending from corrosion detection, risk assessment, inspection frequency. We have to consider also the mitigation strategy, the compliance with regulation, and definitively, and I'm sure we will touch also this topic in terms of training and awareness, and then data management and budget constraints. But if we can, let's say, consider that this is something that the challenges can vary widely in depending on the industry, on the type of the equipment that is involved, on the operating condition. Those common issues and challenges, in my experience, bring me to put a remark on three of them, like into the risk assessment, where we know, Prafull, that when we are assessing the risk of corrosion under insulation for specific equipment and prioritizing inspection and maintenance effort, it's itself a common challenge because we have different factors. And you mentioned from the beginning, such as the insulation type, we have operating condition, we have material properties that needs to be considered. And this is having an impact then on the frequency for the inspection, because it's always a challenge to determine the appropriate frequency for the corrosion under insulation, because and this become crucial because also discussing with the client, there is a need for balancing the cost of inspection with the risk associated to the potential related failure. And then the third element on which the experience says to put on a light, it is on the mitigation strategy, where clients often are seeking guidance for selecting and then implementing the right mitigation strategy. For example, in terms of what are the corrosion-resistant coating that better value our, let's say, condition or situation, better insulation material that we might apply, or of course, what are the monitoring system that we can enter.
So let's say the specific gaps, are there gaps? For example, people have been using coatings, and coatings have been a mitigation strategy. Um, So are there still gaps in coatings that we are still talking about CUI? Is the cost and benefit is a parameter, or is the technical limitation? Why we are still talking about CUI when we have good coatings?
Yeah, it is interesting because at the end of the day, one of the things that we know is that the corrosion under insulation, it is still something that occur in some of the location where the operating condition are not even the same of the
Oh,
surrounding areas. One of the things that we used to mention is when you have, let's say, dead legs that are normally colder than the main operating lines attached to them. And these unfortunately encourage moisture absorption and in these specific areas that are normally not a priority for the inspection. And some, or sometimes we have to say a lot of failures and leakages that are reported in the industry are reported on let's say, small bore connection, which are then prone to vibration, wetness, and also defective insulation or sometimes inadequate jacketing.
there are gaps in small bore pipings issues, and probably coatings are not foolproof there because of geometrical limitations and curvatures, difficulties. So that remains. And fundamentally, people do RBI and risk-based inspections, but still, in your experience, from the operator's point of view or from the end user's point of view, are they aware of this, of the extent of importance of CUI as a problem to be looked at, or it's getting diluted within the managed damage mechanisms? In your experience, is an awareness about it?
Awareness, it is a major concern in the sense that there are several factors that can contribute to the awareness, no? So we know because this is also conversation we are having maybe internally with our team when we review historical incidents, for example, or with the client when we assess the different regulations and standards. And then, let's say, within our let's say, collaborative approach. There are industry best practice. There are element of risk assessments and, of course, operational and financial impact. But if I have to say something specific, so there are some high-profile accident and incident related to corrosion under insulation that have raised the awareness about the potential consequences. And this, what is one of the immediate consequence of that? That the incidents have prompted regulatory agency and industry bodies to emphasize the importance of corrosion under insulation prevention and also mitigation. Also, regulatory agency have introduced and updated standards, and the industry association itself and organization often, so we know, publish, and we contribute also publishing best practices and guidance documents. And these resources all together are helping operators understanding the risk and recommended approach to then mitigate those risks. And coming to the risk assessment, as part of the risk assessment efforts, many operators are conducting assessment that include the corrosion under insulation. And this process is helping also identifying and assessing the consequences and how to take appropriate preventive measure in order to then what? Trying to mitigate the impact in terms of financial and operation for associated failures to corrosion under insulation, let's say, episodes that, as we know, at the end of the day, there is, in my opinion, first, there is a potential environmental harm. Mm-hmm. Second, it is, of course, something that it is associated also to, for the client in terms of production downtime. There are a repair cost. And all of these factors from we can start saying performance and sustainability. So financial performance and sustainability point of view are becoming increasingly evident to the operator. But despite these awareness rising efforts, so the level of awareness can still vary widely among the operators and also organizations. Some are proactive addressing these risks, but others, let's say, may not fully grasp.
From Bureau Veritas perspective, are you taking specific measures to address this awareness problem with educational RBI processes, specific initiatives?
I would say that what we are bringing into the market is something that I was commenting a post during the weekend that was more related to sustainability. And in this post, there was one friend, colleague of mine that have mentioned that in order to move and progress toward net zero, one crucial ingredient, it is working through collaborative approach and through an integrated solution approach. And I believe that being a corrosion under insulation not easy, we need to take a mix of different actions. So when you say what can we do, there is here again an integrated approach with a collaborative, let's say, spirit in order to identify the equipment with risk of corrosion under insulation, consider also the industrial environment and assess the risk of moisture due to, sometimes we forget, but we in the cooling tower in location where it was not identified to be a risk are a major element. And you touched before, assessing a risk of external chloride stress corrosion cracking on stainless steel equipment, or we need to integrate implementing the risk-based inspection on equipment where the CUI is likely, and then define inspection and of course effectiveness, allowing to avoid removing 100% of the insulation, and then ensure, for example, the maintenance of insulation done at periodical basis. And similarly, the same for coating. We mentioned already coating multiple times in order to also foster that if there is no coating, at least this become mandatory, because policy development for the insulation for coating, it's always in evolution. And whenever it has been implemented, for example, I think to the offshore asset where let's say the atmosphere is quite high. So it is something that allowed some improvement and progress.
Exactly. So obviously you are taking a lot of steps and education, and obviously RBI is one big angle there, that within the RBI process there's an educational piece, big time. And I like your word about collaboration. It's not just one way, it's actually multiple parties needs to collaborate to address these. I believe fundamentally RBI is a process to bring stakeholders together, talking about issues and talking about the risk together.
Very true, very true. And if I can add one small other thing, it's not only RBI, because as part of our integrated management services, so we have the risk-based inspection, but we have also the corrosion management or monitoring program. We have corrosion audit. And what we try to convey as a message to the client is by presenting the corrosion under insulation likelihood and risk on the asset and location, which are of course prone or more prone to this threat within the facilities. And there is one project, for example, we are currently running in Middle East, where we are developing the CUI likelihood assessment scoring sheet to assign the likelihood and priority for inspection, and then monitoring on the insulated component at tag level. So going over even granular in this case.
So which means, RBI have a lot of potential and beyond RBI as well. But coming back to say your experience, and Bureau Veritas in general is very provides expertise on RBI. Yeah. How effective is RBI for CUI?
Prafull, it is always a challenging question. Why? Because as per our experience, the risk-based inspection, and for the ones like us that we are in the market for the last 20 and plus years. So I still remember when the API 581 was, let's say, initiated in the market. And today we can say that it's one of the best solutions, also because it's collaborative, as you mentioned, in order to monitor the risk also for the corrosion under insulation. And then, let's say, allow us to execute adequate, inspection strategy. The weakness might be more associated to contextual or environmental element in terms of it might be that there is some pure maintenance capabilities. So, for example, the insulation that is in pure condition, and it's where, let's say, the corrosion under insulation will start occurring, or pure coating condition, it's also a factor, let's say, that allow the CUI to spread quickly. And we have to also maybe highlight that recently lots of coating issue occurred. So we know that unfortunately are reported improper surface preparation, where the moisture remaining between the steel and the coating and leading, let's say, to corrosion under coating, for example. But anyway, risk-based inspection is today recognized.
Yeah.
An approach for evaluating the overall risk on equipment and corrosion loop. However, then depending on what? Depending on which is the methodology that we use, because we said, yes, there is a standard, but similarly, we know that could be qualitative, semi-quantitative, quantitative, and what is the main driver? What are the data that we have? Data availability and data reliability. What are the resource allocation and implementation that make this, let's say, RBI effectiveness vary in a different grade? In particular, for example, the integrity management of high critical location, like insulated component, that lag, the trunnion support, flame faces, might not be effective by only applying the risk-based inspection on a corrosion circuit or piping group level. So using CUI dead lag register, like we mentioned also before, and campaign-based inspection and, better than me, monitoring practices are required to complement the RBI program. Again, it's a matter of combining and putting different view and expertise together, but still there is base inspection. It's a very good practice to be included.
So I gather that RBI is effective. There are quantitative, semi-quantitative, and qualitative methods. Depends on the situations and what is appropriate. But API 581 in particular have been adopted in the industry widely, and it's very quantitative. It's subject of how good the inputs are and how it's subject of assumptions and inputs. But if the inputs are bad, the output is going to be bad. But as you said, there are potentially gaps around specifics, for example, dead legs, or small geometries, or nozzles maybe, which still need addressing. Probably there's a subsection within the RBI guidelines needed for that. We'll talk about specific gaps in the RBI process and the future possibilities in the next episode. So thank you, Andrea, for this. See you in the next episode.